Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second night of our spring conference. I hope many of you enjoyed our first session last night. And if this is your first time, welcome. And I hope that we see many of you back with our other session this coming week. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of the session today. But before we begin, I would like to request that everyone, if you can, mute yourself during the presentation so that we can focus on our presenter today. But if you have any questions during the presentation, just please write it down on the chat, and I will be looking at that as we go along, and then I'll be referring to your questions so that Ellie can speak about it or answer it. So now, on behalf of CTAM, we are delighted to have and introduce Ellie Francis to all of you. Ellie is originally from the Grand Rapids area and has been working in the theatrical world for over 15 years. And they have performed in over 50 shows with Grand Rapids Community Theater and are a proud Actors Equity member who have performed in New York City and in regional productions with Playwrights Horizon, Mason Street Warehouse, and the Liberty Theater at 42nd Street. In addition, Ellie owns and operates Rossa Casting with her wife, which provides on-camera talent for film, TV, and print. And they also have thoroughly enjoyed working behind the table as a director, choreographer, producer, and costume and properties designer for several productions and events over the years, and thrives as a creative producer. With no further ado, we welcome Ellie Francis. Thank you for having us tonight.
Hello, thank you so much. First off, I want to acknowledge that I'm currently in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I want to acknowledge the land and labor of the Three Fires Council, Chippewa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. These people who have connection to this land, I honor and respect their presence as well. And I also want to thank CTAM and the entire organization for having me here today. Community theater is very near and dear to my heart. It absolutely formed me into the type of human I am today, in addition to the type of artist and actor and casting director and all of the hats that we put on as artists. It absolutely informed and has formed a big part of who I am, that's for sure. So I just wanted to start with that I'm so honored to be here and to be speaking with all of you who work in an industry that needs all the love and support it can get. So with that, my particular presentation I'm going to talk about today is rooted in audition preparation, audition spaces, how to prepare for it as an artist, as an actor, how to navigate different types of rooms. As Rodell mentioned in my lovely introduction, I have a very unique and prismed experience as an artist, meaning that I do play on both sides of the table, which not a lot of folks do. So I have had the great privilege of being an actor and a musical theater performer, both in musicals and plays. I've done some Shakespeare, but I also really love working behind the table. I attribute that to my work in the community theater world too. I firmly believe that if you want to be a really well-rounded artist, you should at least be familiar with every position in the space. So I have done properties design, I have worked in costume shops, I have ushered, I've done house managing, I've worked in the box office, fundraising committees, play selection committees. When I started doing theater, I knew that I needed to learn every part of it. The only things I haven't gotten into as much, but it's on my bucket list, is to get more into some of the technical world. I would love to learn more about light design. I have opinions, but I don't know how to light a show quite yet. I can run a board as a stage manager, but again, I would love to learn more about light design. I would love to learn more about some set design. I can do a little bit of carpentry, but I don't know that I would trust my skill with a power tool quite yet. But the life is long and we have plenty of time to learn new skills. So I also wanted to mention that when we're talking about actors, whenever I'm working with an actor who's coming into the industry, that's a big part of my my spiel to them is, yes, be an actor, learn your craft, know your material, do your homework, do all of the things we need to do as artists and as actors, but also don't forget about the other parts and players that make this art exist. And sometimes it's just making sure that you're volunteering for those other roles, honoring what they do. And if you've done it a few times, you can get a different respect and perspective for it. So just kind of wanted to chat about that a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to jump into my presentation. I'm going to share my screen for a little bit. This is just going to kind of guide me along the way to make sure I stay on point. But as Rodell mentioned, feel free to put your questions in and I'll answer them as we go. And then also I'm going to be around after the presentation to have more conversations as needed. So one moment here. Okay, so audition prep, right? One of the biggest questions I get as an artist and as an actor, and whenever I've done any sort of coaching for folks, has been it's almost always framed as like, what's the best way to audition? What's the best song, the best monologue? What's the perfect audition experience? And the answer to that question is almost always going to be there is no such thing, right? Art is not perfect. It's a matter of taste. It's a matter of experience, depending on which world in the arts you're working in. And in the theatrical world, especially, it's ever changing. So what might have been like the perfect audition song or the perfect monologue last year is absolutely not going to necessarily fit the bill this year. And also the material that you're coming into the space to work within is not going to be that cookie cutter as well. So while some folks might have like that one audition song that they always do, one of the things I always try to impart on folks that I'm talking to in regards to the audition process is make sure you have many tools in your belt. So that's one of the first ways I like to approach this. So the first thing that we want to talk about in the audition space, in the space of audition prep and audition rooms, is what your role is as an actor. So we know the basics of what your role as an actor is, right? We know it's to say lines and to sing songs and to dance and to move through the space and tell the story. But when you're approaching an audition space, knowing your role in the whole culture of the theater, of the show, and of the industry can be really important. As someone who has, I've lived the last 8 years in New York and have done the stereotypical hustle of hitting the pavement and showing up at 5 a.m. with my book in hand, wearing a dress that looks like everybody else's dresses, or nervous that I have the same song that the other 500 people behind me have. I've experienced that, and one of the things that always helped me and always does help me when I'm in the middle of that kind of hustle and bustle of audition is just remembering what my role is. And that's really to make sure that I am a prepared, present, authentic actor. And when I walk into the space that I present all of those things, my role is also, in my work, is also to know the work that I'm doing, know my material, know the kind of work I want to do. To know my worth in the space. That's a big one as well. We talk a lot about having confidence, and confidence is great, but also knowing your worth and your agency in the room is, I think, sometimes a quicker way to drop an actor into their position in that space, is to know that if I'm in an audition room and I'm here to perform for you a 16-bar cut or a 30-second monologue, that I've earned this space and this is my time just as much as it is the time of the people behind the table. So while that might seem like, oh, that's just confidence, it's having confidence in what you do. I personally, when somebody tells me to have confidence, I will do the opposite. I will just instantly spiral down that old actor adage of like, oh, but what if I'm not right? And all of the what ifs. So for me, I like to reframe that to knowing my worth. And that just I kind of do this gesture because it just kind of drops me in to how I am prepared, how I'm ready to show up. Owning your space and owning your time. So that kind of goes hand in hand with worth, right? But to be specific, when I say own your space, I mean own your space as a person in the audition room, own your space as a person in your piece. So if you are doing a song or a monologue that has very specific obstacles, really owning and knowing who you are in that story is what can really pull someone out of the crowd in an audition situation where you've got a lot of competition, or it's a very savory piece of work that you're auditioning for. So really owning that space is one of those things that, again, might sound like confidence, but it's really more about specificity, right? um, and owning your time. Most audition times are really limited. As actors, we have a lot to show you. If you ask me to show you who I am, and I only have, I mean, even in a professional world, the most you really get is 3 minutes in the room, and that's being pretty generous. Um, that's not a lot of time to really show you who I am and all the things I can do and all the worlds I can live in. So I need to own the time that I'm in there from the second I walk in to the second I walk out, and know as an actor that that is my time, that this is time that the casting and creative team has dedicated to learn about me. So that's what I mean when I say own your time and own your space, is really know that that's part of the work. And that goes into, I'll circle back to the being prepared and being present. If you already walk in with this sense of owning your work, owning your space, owning your time, and being really prepared before you walk in, which we'll talk about in a few slides, what being prepared means, then it also it can help remove a lot of the anxiety that can go around how to best use your 3 minutes in the room. And then what else I'll tap on with this particular slide is I want to circle back a little bit to knowing your work and knowing your worth, and how those two can also tie in with each other. So when I say know your work, I do actually mean your materials. So if you have a 16 bar cut or a 32 bar cut of music that you're bringing in, this should be a song that you know in your bones, that no matter what happens in that room, no matter what happens before you walk in or right after you walk in, because sometimes anxiety about something after the audition can creep into the space, that you know your work so well that it's immovable. It's in you. It's a part of who you are. And I also mean when I say know your work is know the kind of work that you bring in as an artist. So as a singer, as an actor, depending as a dancer, know what your skill sets are, own them, and honor them. I I firmly believe that a lot of actors, and especially actors that I've worked with, who are prepping for college, right? They're getting ready to go off and do the big audition circuit for the different theater-based colleges. There is this like need to be this triple threat. Yes, that is valuable. There are triple threat roles. There are particular roles in particular shows that do require you to have 3 specific skill sets. I think the most common is that people think of is like anything goes, right? We all know that Reno needs to be able to tap dance. Reno needs to be able to sing that song that we all know. Those are very specific notes. And Reno needs to be a very good actor, specifically a comedic actor. So those are 3 like hard skills that are required for that particular role to tell their story authentically. So when I say know your work, know that when you're auditioning for a role, know if the kind of work that you're going to bring in serves the story and serves that particular role. So that's kind of what I mean when I talk about that. I think there can sometimes also be the phrase that we're all used to hearing of like, make sure you know your type. I personally have a massive problem with the word type in reference to how we talk about actors. and typing people in and out. I think that that is something that we can absolutely, as an industry, retire that way of thinking. It's more about knowing your work, because if I know what kind of hard skills you bring in as an actor are going to help tell this story, then that is your type. It doesn't really make a difference if you're tall or if you're, you have light hair or if you have dark hair. It really makes a difference on the context of the show, the context of the storytelling. And I want to enhance and support who you are as a person within that story, and they should work together. So that's kind of what I mean about those particular phrases, and how they work in a modern concept when we're talking about theater. Do I have any questions so far? I want to make sure I'm not steamrolling through. Looking over at Rodell.
No questions yet, but I do
Okay.
have a question. How would you differentiate between being confident and being seen as perhaps arrogant by being overconfident? Is there a distinction? And how would you
Absolutely.
do that?
Absolutely. Authenticity. Authenticity is the very quick answer to that. So be authentic, meaning like just knowing and trusting who you are as a person. And I think also giving credit to the other folks in the room, right? A casting director, a director, a creative team. It's their job. If I'm on that side of the table, it's my job as a creative team member to know, to be able to see through an ego that may or may not form and support the stories. Now, if we're going to pretend like actors don't have egos, we're all lying to ourselves. That's part of the work. But there is a little bit of a you can normally spot it pretty quick, and you can spot it in a couple areas. You can spot it in if somebody comes in and they are leading with ego that is self-serving and not story serving. That's very clear. I can tell within a few minutes, like within a few seconds of somebody starting a song, if they're singing the song for me because they want to show off a high note, or if they're singing the song because this story is something that resonates with them. And for me, I will cast somebody who tells the story better and misses the note over someone who sings the crap out of the note. And I'm seeing, ego in their performance. But it is a matter of taste. I think I feel that way about even the word talent, about when people are like, oh, she's so talented. Well, talent is a matter of taste. I see talent in a very different way than the casting director or the director to my right. For me, talent and skill go hand in hand. Somebody can be very skilled and still not right for the track. So I don't know if I answered your question specifically enough, but for the quick answer is just authenticity, because an ego is not authentic. It's just not rooted in that as its own phrase. Excellent. Okay, so now we're going to get into. Oh,
we do have one question.
Sure.
They just want to know, what is a callback?
A callback, sure. So the process of auditioning, I'm going to go back a little bit then before we go into the hard materials. So the process of auditioning can vary depending on which world you're in. Community theater kind of has their own order of events. Then you have regional theaters when you're talking about the structure of different industries within the theater world. Regional theaters are going to be theaters that offer pay to their actors. They typically are also theaters that have some sort of an agreement with Actors Equity, where they can bring in some equity roles. They might have some shows where they have that ability. It's like a professional theater, but specifically if you're a regional theater, that typically means you have a contract with the Actors Equity Union. And then we have, off Broadway, and then we kind of go to Broadway. That's kind of the order of size loosely, but I would very much so stress that it's not an order of importance, that Broadway is not the only way to be a working actor, and it's not necessarily the best way. As an actor, you work best in the space that you work best in. And if you're a working actor, you're a working actor. A Broadway credit does not make you any more valuable. Again, this is me speaking on my opinion, but it doesn't make you any more valuable than someone who has not had that experience. It might inform the world that I will remember to put you in. Experience is important, but keep that in mind too. I think that can sometimes kind of bog you down. So a callback, the question. A callback is typically it's the audition that happens after your initial audition. So in the community theater space, typically you have your first audition, which for most theaters is going to be you bringing in a cut of music if it's a musical. Some community theaters will have you bring in a monologue if you're auditioning for a play. Some community theaters will, if you're auditioning for a play, will have scenes from the show. They don't have you do a monologue. It just is kind of a matter of how that particular theater wants to run it. And that's your initial audition. That's how they meet you. That's how the creative team meets you. And then if they want to see more and they feel like they need to see more of you, they will give you a call back and ask you to come back. They will literally, back in the day, they would literally call you. Sometimes they tell you in the room. They tell you right then. It depends on the team. And the callback is the second round. And sometimes there can be multiple rounds of callbacks. For the most part, community theaters tend to only have one round of callbacks. When you get into regional theater, off Broadway and Broadway, there can be way more rounds of callbacks. Sometimes when you're in that world, you'll have a callback. You'll have like 3 rounds of callbacks, and the 4th round is where they bring you in with other folks that are called back and start putting you in the same scene together to see how your chemistry works. I will tell you that does not always happen though. I have also booked shows by auditioning in the first one. They didn't give me a call back. I was like, oh, well, okay, well, I'm not getting that role. And then I was cast. So it's not necessarily a guarantee that you're going to be cast if you get called back. And it's also not a guarantee that you're not going to be cast if you're not getting a call back. I have also not called back folks that I didn't need to see anymore. They gave me enough in their first audition. So why would I call them back in just to spend and potentially waste their time in this space if I have what I need and I've decided to cast them? So that's what a callback is. It does typically entail, normally a callback is also going to have you do some material from the show. That's another thing that can make that particular audition step unique, is that your first audition, you're not normally doing something from the show. You're bringing in your own work. The callback, normally they will send you some callback material. Like they'll want to hear you do the actual song or hear you do the actual monologue. Not always though. Again, I've done callbacks too where when I was auditioning for a new work, the material wasn't published yet. So all I had was the concept, the story, and and the genre of the show. So both the first audition and the second audition, I had to bring in my own material. Those are a lot harder to audition for. But they're also, having been on the other side, they're also really complicated to cast as well, because you're really, you're asking a lot of your actors to do that kind of work outside of the room. But yeah, that's another option when it comes to a callback. So I think that answered that question. Excellent. So I'm going to move forward now to some hard materials. So we hear this term book a lot when we say what's in your book. Most folks, when I hear them talking about their book, we're normally talking about if you're a musical theater or opera performer, your book is like your book of music. So your book should be, I have on the slide, it should be well-rounded, and it should show the room and the creative teams who you are. So often I work with folks who kind of fall into one of 2 categories. They either come in and their book has 2 songs. It's a high song and a low song, or it's a fast song and a slow song. And that's it. Those are their songs. That's what they do. That's all they do. Okay. The other option that's on the other side of the spectrum is I have worked with folks who, and I have been this person, rightly so, who have 75 songs in their book. And they have 3 songs that are big band. They have 4 rock songs. They have this favorite song of theirs that they did in voice lessons 10 years ago that they've always gone back to. They have this very high soprano piece. They have this very low tenor piece. It's all of these things. When I say well-rounded book, it somewhere in between those two worlds is what we mean. So you want, so on the side of having too little material is if you only have 2 songs, then that's all you have to show the room. And typically, if you're auditioning, especially in the professional world, in the community world, theater world, this does happen as well, but especially in the professional world, you bring your book in, and I have on a number of occasions needed to pull another song out. I sing my song, and then they're like, "Oh, that's great. Do you have something else you can show us?" And if you only have 2 options and they don't like that second option, you just shot yourself in the foot. Like you've limited yourself in what you can show them. Now, what rounding that out, and on the other side of it, if you walk in with your book and you've got 75 songs in there, and the director goes, "Do you have something else you can show me?" That can be very overwhelming. You should never have something in your book that you can't sing right then. If it's in your book, it's in your body. That's kind of the rule. You should have it in your bones. You should be able to sing that at 5 a.m. without a warm up. You should be able to sing that at 6 p.m. after an 8-hour day. It's in you. So having it be well rounded and having it show them who you are, that also is going to be informed by the type of material, right? So for me, my material that's in my book is going to be what we call bendy. So I sing a lot of different genres of music. I happen to have that particular skill set. So that means I have different songs from different genres that are bendable. So even though I might have one song, let's see, let me think of an example. Like I have a song that's by Queen, for instance. This particular song is like a rock gospel piece. So because it's rock and gospel, it has a lot of different feelings in there, and depending on the tempo and the intention behind that particular song, I could bring that in for a variety of different types of shows. I would bring that in for a production that's asking for a pop rock song, totally checks that box. I could also bring that song in for a show like Rent, because the track of Maureen is traditionally like blue-eyed blues, right? It kind of has that like gospel bluesy feel, and Queen and Maureen totally work, right? If Maureen was going to pick a song to sing at an audition, she'd probably pick a song by Queen because it's also an anthem, right? And they were very much so about her kind of story. So that's what having a bendable piece means. And that's how you want to make sure you round your book out, is have a variety of pieces, not too many, and not too few. Don't cut yourself short on what you can bring to the table. Headshot. So in
Ellie,
community. Oh
we
yes,
have a question.
yeah.
So you mentioned having a song by Queen. So when is it appropriate to use pop music rather than musical theater pieces?
Sure, great question. You use it when you're asked for it. um, in one of my following slides, I have like a big like do's and don'ts, and one of the points I talk about is casting will ask you and be very clear about what they want, and if they aren't, they should be. I'm just going to put that out there. So if we've got folks in this room that are in creative teams, that's all an actor has to go off of, is what you put in your notice. So if you ask for a pop rock song, I'm going to bring in a pop rock song. I'm not going to bring in something from Wedding Singer, because even though Wedding Singer is a pop rock show, that's not a pop rock song. That's still musical theater. So if I'm doing, for instance, there was a lot of talk a few years ago when they did the Rent tour. And I coached quite a few people for that particular audition, because that non-equity tour of Rent, they specifically asked for pop rock, no musical theater. It was in the notice. So a lot of folks brought in musical theater songs that were pop rock shows, and that's directly going against what they asked for, because the creative team wanted to see how you lived in contemporary music. And as even if it's a really great score, like I used Wedding Singer as an example, it still is musical theater pop rock. There is a difference in tonality. There's a different way of singing that material. It's very narrative driven, to where, a song by the Beatles is very narrative driven, but that's a very specific genre, right? So yes, there's absolutely times where pop rock is appropriate, but you would not bring that into a show like Sunday in the Park with George, which is very like specific when it comes to the type of music you'd be singing. So knowing the work that you bring and knowing the work you're going out for is going to inform that. Headshot, this is mostly for if you're going to be doing professional theater, although I will say, as someone who went from community theater to professional theater, I know it would have been good practice for me at the time when I moved to have had more community theaters ask for headshots, because headshots and resumes are a big part of the professional world. I hope that someday we get away from having to print everything off, because global warming, and I would like us to not continue to print things off constantly. But we do still live in a world where having a physical headshot and a physical resume together is really important. So, but the key to having a headshot is just making sure that it has a professional feel and that it looks like you when you walk in the room. Over touching a headshot, if you changed your hair drastically, it's no longer useful to me if you come in with a bob and this particular headshot, you have a shaved head. That's not the person that I asked to bring in. Like, doesn't mean you're not going to get cast, but it's not authentically showing me who you are. And you could be missing out on tracks that you're better suited for. Resume, same thing there. You want the resume to reflect your body of work. And you also want it to reflect your body of work in how you want to be seen. So I know that Rodell, you mentioned in my intro, like I had the great privilege of doing over 50 shows in Grand Rapids Theater. I do not put all of those shows on my resume because, one, that is way too much information. So I pare that down and I customize my resume to fit the space that I'm in. It shows my well-roundedness. I make sure I have a couple different selections that make sense, but I also don't necessarily need all of my work for every particular job. But if I'm going in for a Shakespeare show, I'm going to make sure my Shakespeare is on there, or that might not be as necessary if I'm going in for an operatic piece where it's more necessary to put my opera credits. So just really know that that resume and headshot and that book, these three hard materials, they're there to support you. They're there to show the creative team who you are on paper. And then they should also reflect who you are in the room. They should go hand in hand. Because if you come in and you don't look like your headshot, you've got a resume full of tracks that I wouldn't cast you for, and you've got like 55 songs and you can't decide what you want to sing, that tells me that you don't know who you are. That goes back to my first slide. You don't know your work. So you need to figure out what you're doing before you bring it in to show it to me. Yeah, so I'll just move along. Okay, oh, I'm watching my time. Okay, I think I'm doing okay. So now I'm going to move on to approaching the work, right? I kind of talked about this, but here's a nice big slide for all of us to have some hard skills attached to it. Knowing the world and knowing what you bring to it. So we've talked a little bit up to this point about the actor's role in the industry, about the actor's way of approaching their hard materials, like their book, their audition materials, a callback, kind of the structure of an audition, what an audition's purpose is. And now we want to talk about approaching the work in a specific matter of knowing what you bring to the world. So what I mean by that, this actually kind of goes back to the other question that we had about when is it appropriate to bring in a pop rock song. It depends on the world of the show. Right. So if you are going out for an audition and they haven't given you a specific genre, if they have not put in the breakdown, we want you to bring in 16 bars of musical theater, or we want you to bring in 16 bars of golden age musical theater. Most audition notices give you a genre to work within. You do want to know the world. So if I am going in as an actor, if I'm going to go in for a production of Waitress, I need to know the world of Waitress. We're talking about working class individuals. We're talking about folks who may have a little bit of salt of the earth to them. We're talking about a show that talks about individual struggles, individual relationship dynamics. We're talking about a show that also lives in more of what would be considered like a pop singer-songwriter musical theater world. So that I'm painting the world here for you, and that's going to inform what I could bring to that story. So if I'm going to audition for that, I need to know, what does Ellie Francis bring to this particular world that I think tells this story? And that will help you know what material to work on. And it'll also help you know what the room is going to look and feel like. It's going to be a very different room than if I'm auditioning for Man of La Mancha, right? That's a classical musical theater that has very classical ties, but it also has a lot of humor, very different genres. but they're both very story driven, right? So that's one of those moments where you might have a piece of music that you could be bendable, depending on your track and depending on your craft. Have material that authentically supports how you would move in this world, and how you would move through this, how your person would move. So for instance, if I'm going in for a piece, I should know what story I want to tell, and if that story is going to work in this world. And I should know that in the 16 bar cut. So that's a really important one, and make sure that it's authentic to you. So I keep going back to authenticity, because that is what we're doing here, right? We're authentically telling stories, and we all know we've seen that play or that musical or that opera, and we've walked away being like, oh my gosh, that was so real. I really felt that story. You get that reaction when you have artists and actors that are doing this kind of work, that are authentically showing up to the material as their authentic selves, and that's being celebrated, as opposed to getting wedged in or trying to mimic. That stuff can be well skilled, but you can see through it as an audience. Even if you don't know that's what you're seeing through, you can. And then the third point about approaching the work is having an informed and researched perspective and an open mind. So even though we've talked a lot about your prep work, right? About knowing who you are, what are your skill sets, what do you have to offer? What book of music are you going to bring in and make sure that that shows what you have to do? What is your resume going to look like? What is your headshot going to look like? You can do all of this prep work before you walk in that room. And as long as it's in you, then like that's who you are. But be ready and be prepared for adjustments, for notes, and all of the things that happen in a space, right? We all know that the old adage of like yes and, right? We all did enough improv to know that it's a yes and moment. And that's a really good hard skill to make sure that you practice and that you are prepared for. And the more prepared and the more confident and authentic, like authenticity you are rooted in, the easier it is to take notes and adjustments, because you're not taking notes on who you are as a person. You already know that. They're just asking you to maybe adjust the volume. Easy, that you can do. But if you take adjust the volume as, oh my gosh, I'm too loud. Oh, they don't like my voice. Well, that's what we're going to see in your monologue. That's what we're going to see in your song. We're going to see all of that panic. So everything we've talked about up to this point will support you in the space to be able to adjust and take notes and apply them as they're presented. All right. So,
Ellie, I have a question.
Yes.
When using a 16 bar, what is appropriate? I know you need to know the material that you are working with, but for example, I've had some people that audition for me, and they chose the first 5 introduction as part of that 16 bar. So
Yeah.
when is it appropriate to start? And would having 2 extra measures be okay, or having 1 or 2 less than the 16 bar be okay? And when it comes to those points where there are music interludes and then you want your high note to be highlighted, how do you go about that?
Sure. So how to approach cuts? Absolutely. So this, I'm going to preface my answer with, this is always going to be a matter of taste. So I'm going to answer you through how I would approach this. Different directors, different music directors have different theories. There are a couple standards though. One pretty common, and like everyone will agree, that a 16 bar cut should not be more than a minute, right? We can count our measures as much as we want to. Now, some music directors, depending on the piece, they will count and they will stop at 16 bars. I have been in that room. Again, this is a matter of taste. In most of the like fruitful audition environments that I've had the privilege of participating in, that's not the way the room works. It's a full minute. So time your song, that's one thing. Counting the measures is helpful, but also in making sure that we keep art accessible, that we remove some elitism that can be surrounding, especially musical theater. Not everybody reads music. I happen to read music, but not everybody does. And not all of the shows that we do require that type of a skill set. So while we ask people to count their measures, it's also just a minute's worth of music. The reason the 16 bar cut exists is to keep the time restraint to a reasonable amount of time. A good 16 bar cut should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. That's the rule of thumb. So while it can seem like, oh, I really need to show this high note, if the high note supports the narrative of the story and supports you in that space, then the work is doing the 16 bar cut that supports you up to that point. So a great example is like if I were to bring in a piece from Come From Away, there's a really great moment in the middle of that song, and there is no easy way to get to it. There's a lot of redundant notes, there's a lot of storytelling, but what you could do is you could take the first two measures of the beginning of the story and story-wise jump to the bridge for one measure and then jump to the big part over here that's going to show a little bit of range, but the thought process feels like it's one whole song. One whole thought is really the goal. Beginning of a thought, the middle of a thought, and the end of a thought is the rule. So don't be afraid to work with a vocal coach. That's what vocal coaches are there for, is to put your cut together. I think a lot of folks get stuck in the first 16 bars or the last 16 bars, kind of like what you described, Rodell. And frankly, with the way that we have access to music nowadays, with musicnotes.com, there's plenty, I'm not plugging them, I don't work for them, but there's plenty of ways to get different audition cuts done. And I will say, again, I'm not plugging musicnotes.com, but if you want a hard, fairly accessible, not very expensive avenue, if you have somebody that's coming that's like, I don't really have the time or the finances or the interest to have a professional work with me on this, they do have an audition cut section now where you can literally go to musicnotes.com. You can go up and you pick an instrument, like you could pick like flute or piano. They now have one that's called voice, and they have audition cuts that are 16 bars. And if you're wanting another way that you can use this particular modality or like assistance, is that can help you learn how to put together your own 16 bar cuts too. So go over, even if you're not going to buy any, and take a look at some of these songs that have already been formatted that way, and start to get yourself in that mindset of how to take a story and put it into 1 minute to authentically show the creative team a beginning, a middle, and an end of a phrase. It's particularly hard with 8 bar cuts. You heard that correctly. There are definitely worlds in New York where you are asked for 8 bars and that's all you got. But even with an 8 bar cut, if you can make sure that your cut has a beginning, a middle, and an end, it might mean that you don't get your big high note at the end, but that's okay. Let them ask you for more. That's all right. Because if they want more, they will ask for more. So give them an authentic, we go back to that first slide, right? An authentic storytelling driven piece that really shows what you can do. And frankly, your range should be on your resume. So if they're nervous about you hitting a note, they'll ask you. Don't lie about your range though, because they will ask you also. Like if you say you can hit a C, you best be able to hit a C, because I've had that happen too at like 8 a.m. I'm like, oh yeah, don't mind my iced coffee breath. I can totally do that. So keep that in mind, that needs to be an honest representation of your work. You only hurt yourself if it's not. It's not going to make you look any better if it isn't. So, all right. So now you're about to walk in the room, right? We've kind of talked about all this prep. When you're walking into the room, this slide is like the perfect representation of what it feels like right before you walk in. And I do really mean like, don't overthink it. As long as you've done everything we've talked about, as long as you have really like worked with yourself, and it's a continually ever-changing process, right? Knowing what you want to bring and your taste as an artist and what you want to do and what you can do is going to adjust and grow. So give yourself that space. But as long as you are prepared, you really know your material, you know what story you're coming in there to tell, you have your resume, you have your headshot, you have all your hard things prepared, don't overthink the audition process. And really let the casting and creative team do their job. It's their job to decide if what you bring to the table fits the story that they've been tasked to tell. It sounds really easy to think. It is a very difficult thing for actors to know, and you really have to know. That's why I always start these seminars and these workshops with know what you do. What is your role? And your role is to walk in a room and show a creative team what you could do in the world of their show. And as long as you're doing that, that's your job. That's the end of your job. There's nothing beyond that. You don't have to make sure you sing a song that looks and feels like this particular character that you really want to be in. That's not your job. You're already casting it. You don't have to cast yourself. You just have to show up and be authentic and do the thing. And the casting and creative team will put you where they need you to go. So I cannot stress that enough of the like, yes, I say don't overthink it, but I really mean it. So now we're going to talk about actually picking the material, right? So what song, what monologue? I kind of said this at the beginning, right? There's no perfect song. There's no perfect monologue. There are really solid choices, but how you want to put together what kind of material you bring in is kind of by going through these rules. One is what's the show and what is the season. So some theaters do like summer stock style theater auditions where like you come in. I know that like Circle Theater in Grand Rapids does this, for instance. Let's just use them as an example. They do summer style theater. So they typically have 1 weekend of auditions for their whole season. So your initial audition, that first one where you bring in material, you only have 1 song you're going to sing, but you're going to be up for 3 different shows. That's a lot. So that is like such a perfect example of making sure you bring in a piece that is within the world of the shows. You're not going to have a piece that's within the world of all 3 of them, but make sure that you show them enough of who you are that could work in those worlds. Don't overthink it. I have gone in and auditioned for seasons that had a country musical, a like 1920s, like Gatsby style musical, and then a rock musical. And I'm like, well, what the heck am I supposed to sing? Like, you couldn't have picked a like further from it. So what I ended up doing was finding a song that fit 1 or 2 of those worlds that was in my book already. I was like, this works. I can tell this authentically, and making sure that my resume showed them some of the other gaps that they could fill in, right? They could tell that I had some experience doing this particular track, which is kind of similar to that third show that isn't really in my piece. It's just a matter of shuffling that and showing them who you are as a well-rounded artist, and picking and choosing if you're going to show them in the way that you sing it or if you're going to show them in your resume. Sometimes you have to make that call. But a lot of community theaters do tend to do 1 show at a time. So that's the nice part about that. And for that, you just really want to know the show. You don't need to memorize the show, but be familiar with it. Be familiar with the world that it's in, whether it's a period piece, is it a jukebox piece that's going to be, all Elvis music. You're not going to bring in Sondheim. If it's an Elvis show, you should probably bring in something from the 50s or 60s or one of Elvis's other songs. That's another way to approach it. But really know the show. What roles and stories within the show do you feel you can authentically tell? This is where we get into that, like, I hate the term like typing yourself, like know your type. Type is relative and it's also by taste. So it's more about like, is this particular person or track, is this person in this show story something that I think I could really tell? And believe it and commit to it. And you're going to mess it up and you're going to learn more about yourself in that process. But if you're rooted in truth and you're rooted in an authentic want to tell that story, then that will come through in your audition. And it also shows me that you know what you, goes back to knowing your work. You know what you can do. That tells me as a casting director and as a director or choreographer that I'm not going to have to teach you, you're coming in for this track that you really aren't necessarily the right skill for. That's something you need to know before you walk in. And you'll just continue to learn that. What pieces within your book or your repertoire support the story, the feel, the world that the show or the season lives within? So this is a really key part. A big issue that a lot of folks tend to do, a big you only have to do it a couple of times for you to realize why it's not the best way to approach it, is they will learn a new piece for this one audition. They really love this show, so they're going to learn this new piece that's going to do all the things. Don't learn material for an audition. Because if it's not in your bones, if it's not in your person, then I'm just going to watch you navigating that in an audition space. So that's why we talk about all of this prep, making sure your book is where it needs to be. You're where you need to be before you walk in as a whole, well-rounded actor. Because then that audition room is just me meeting you. It's not me worried that you're going to mess up the lyrics because you just crammed this last weekend because you knew that you wanted to hit a high C. In 3 minutes, I can see it. I can see it on your face. I can see it in the uneasiness on the sheet music. I mean, it's pretty quick to tell. I can always tell if somebody just learned this piece for this particular show. And also, frankly, you need to know the text. So if you're just learning it, you're not going to do the book work about what the story is. It's not going to have that that feeling to it. So then we go to the last little piece here. Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry. We have a question.
Great.
How do you properly balance your resume, and how much of it is roles you played, and how much of it is related skills and education?
That's a great question. That is going to be based off of the room you're walking into. So if you're walking into a space that is has historically like let you know that they do find pedigree or education to be very specific, I think that that's always really great to have on your resume. If you have vocal coaches or any sort of like direct training, put that on there. It's just letting them know that those are the tools you have to work with. Also, it's a bit of a reference section, right? It's a small industry. So if I put down that I have worked with, Dwayne Davis, who used to be the head of music for GRCC, Dwayne has been a working educator in the music world for a long time. And I might be in an audition room where that person knows Dwayne, right? You don't really have a section for references on a theatrical resume. So your education is a bit of that, if you think about it that way. So if you've got some education and some pedigree on there, put that on there. That's absolutely important. As far as the roles, you want to make sure that you are putting roles on your resume that make sense. I know that sounds silly, but especially in community theater, I had the great privilege of playing a lot of roles that I was probably quite young for. So when you switch in and out of it, you want to make sure that the role makes sense. And I also took roles that folks needed covered, right? Like I probably wasn't the best option for that role, so I'm probably not going to put that on my resume because it doesn't really show them what I can do. So they really should be roles and shows that you have done and that show the casting and creative team what you can do and what you want to do. If I particularly don't want to do roles that are a specific type because I've played that type a lot and I'm trying to get out of that particular world, then I may only put one role that is similar. So for instance, like I played Ula in The Producers. It's a fine role. I don't necessarily want to play that role again. That's not really the type of work I do anymore. And I have like 5 shows where I played kind of that role. Different shows, but like they were all kind of an Ula. So I'm only going to put one of those on there. Let them know, hey, I have this skill set. I can do this thing, but I'm not going to fill up my resume with more roles that aren't really in the world of how I want to work. So I don't know if that fully answered that question, but it's kind of a balance and knowing what you want to do and knowing the room you're walking into. That's the big one there. Also, if you have a coach, work with your coach on that. That's absolutely something a vocal coach should be able to work with you, or an audition coach should be able to look at your resume with you and review it and help refine that. It doesn't hurt to have other sets of eyes that know your work intimately as well to help you get some perspective and be like, I know you really want to play this track, but is that really something that you have a hard skill to walk in the room and do? Let's really talk about that.
I add a question with that.
Yeah.
So for example, if most of your work was mostly in the ensemble, but perhaps in one show you were in the ensemble but had a small speaking line and you had a name, how would you put that into your resume? The name of the actual person that had the line / ensemble, or just keep it all ensemble?
It depends on if it's a recognizable ensemble track. So typically, so for instance, a good example of this is like Bye Bye Birdie, right? Bye Bye Birdie is a cast that has a large ensemble, but a lot of the ensemble players have names. So if you were in Bye Bye Birdie and you played Nancy, I know musical theater enough to know that Nancy has the second solo in Telephone Hour, right? So then you would put Ensemble Nancy. ensemble / Nancy. It lets them know that you were in the ensemble, which means that you probably have a little bit of experience doing some group dance. That tells me that. You can also blend into an ensemble, which is its own skill. Good, there are benefits to blending and benefits to not, but that tells me that you were within an ensemble, but you had the type of caricature or the type of skill set that pulled you out enough to do the Nancy track and sing that particular phrase. So if it's relevant to put the name of the ensemble role, put it there. If it's like newscaster 2, and I'm not really going to know what that is, I probably don't need to know what that is. It really just needs to, if it's going to inform me or add more context to what you did in that show, that's when you put the name there. Another example in Bye Bye Birdie is the Sad Girls. They don't even have names, but those are 2 solo dance tracks. So if I see ensemble Sad Girl 1 or ensemble Sad Girl 2, I know that you have enough skill to have a dance solo, or at least some sort of solo-ness, and that you sang and put it in a happy face, because that's a 3-part harmony, right? So that kind of goes into like, let the casting team do their job, which is to fill that in, but give them the tools to do it. So only if it's relevant to the piece and to coloring in what you did in the show. Okay, so I think, let's see. Oh, what supportive pieces within your book or repertoire do you have to offer should you be asked for an additional piece? So we talked about this a little bit, so I don't need to go too much harder on this. I actually jumped ahead of my slides, but making sure that you have that well-rounded book. This kind of just goes back to that, and have a second piece ready. So when you're walking in, have a backup piece in case you get the, do you have something else? Have one in your body, rehearse that as part of your audition so that it's not catching you off guard. Warm up for that. If it's a musical, make sure you're present for that. If you're doing 2 monologues, make sure that you have both of those in your bodies and that you can, or in your body, and that you can quickly switch back and forth. That's a really good hard skill to walk into an audition room with. And it just goes to your preparedness. It goes back to the very first part of this seminar, which is know what you have to do, know your work well enough that you could pull it out and do it. But almost always be ready for a second option, because they do frequently ask for that. Okay, so we're walking in the room, right? So now that we're in the room, I have my this is like the most typical New York audition room. This is almost always what it looks like. It's very cold, or it's very hot, but like cold in appearance. And typically, you know, you just are like walking into this cold, empty space. So as actors, you know, we tend to fill up the space when we come in. And I kind of talked about that in the beginning, like own your space, own the room. Don't get comfortable. Like, don't walk over and shake hands with the creative team. Like that's a hard pass, but make sure they know that you're a human. So when you walk in, you know, that's one of the things I always tell folks when I'm coaching them, like, just greet them like you would in any other situation. That's kind of how we know as a creative team what kind of energy you're going to bring into the rehearsal room is how you walk into an audition room. How you talk to the pianist is going to tell me a whole lot about you as an actor. Like, I will know how you're going to take notes. I'm going to know if you're going to show up early. I'm going to know if you're going to know your stuff when you walk in, with how you communicate and how kind you are to the pianist. Your pianist in a musical audition is your duet partner. So that moment of communication is probably the most important moment in the entire audition 3 minutes that you have. It's effectively communicating to your scene partner how you're going to work on this together. So I cannot stress that one enough. So you're in the room. My big don'ts. I have, don't learn a new song or monologue for an audition. I talked about that already, all the reasons why, but it's strong enough that I'm going to put it on here. Don't do something from the show with the hopes of that helping the creative team. If the piece that is in you, that is like in your book, happens to be from the show you're auditioning for, I don't want you to get caught up in the like, but I can't do that because it's from the show. It's not that simple. There's nuance here, of course. But why I have that in parentheses is that I think a lot of folks are like, oh, if I'm going in for Wicked, I'm just going to come in and sing Defying Gravity. Make sure that they know I have it. Then they're just going to hear Defying Gravity for like 3 days. And they won't care anymore about whether or not you have the note. They will ask you to sing from the show at the callback, which is what we talked about earlier. So just that is not necessarily something that we have to do. Now, one other caveat I will say to this is that this is a matter of taste. Some directors will put in their casting notice, songs from the show are welcome. Now, if they tell you that, then that's fair game. Then they're giving you information of like, we are totally open. We know that we're doing Little Shop of Horrors, and every single person that walks in here that's auditioning for Audrey is going to come in with somewhere that's green. But they know it and they're ready for that. And that might be the way that that particular creative team works. So just be ready for that. I just want to make sure that folks aren't just like picking songs with the wrong intention behind it, or picking monologues with the wrong intention. Don't dress in costume or bring props. It's not a thing. When I say don't bring props, the only times I will like break that rule is if you are going in for a farce, and if the prop is really necessary. It needs to be like super necessary. And oftentimes you can get some propness with something that you have on your person, and you can get that same energy. Farces are one of those weird genres of, not weird, they're one of those specific genres of theater that rely on a relationship between a comedian and inanimate objects, right? In theory, that's like one of the few worlds. Clowning is another one, but clowning and farce kind of go hand in hand, right? So that's where you might break that rule, but in general, don't bring props in. It's not useful, and you're just going to end up dropping it, and it's going to get in the way, and it's going to distract me from what you have to tell me. Don't overblock your, yeah.
We do have a question.
Yeah.
In the no costumes part, but is it appropriate to dress in a similar style of the character you're auditioning for?
Yes. So the slide after this is my do list. And what I talk about in that is dressing within the world, just like the music, right? Or the monologue. Dressing within the world of the show is absolutely appropriate. So I'll go back to Waitress for a minute. For instance, I would not walk into Waitress with a corset and 6-inch heels on. That's not the world. That's not these folks. That's not the type of story I'm telling. But I also don't have to walk in there with an apron on and a button-down shirt and character heels, right? I don't need to come in costume. So what I would probably do is I would think about, what do I, as Ellie, as a person, feel comfortable performing in? And what way will my clothing help put me in my story quickest? And if I have the right material, it's already going to be within the world of the show, right? So if you start with the story that you're trying to tell and work backwards, it will help inform your entire presentation, including what you wear. So if I know the stories and the world that I'm walking into is going to be, I keep going back to Waitress because that's just where my brain is now, is going to be, this working class crew of folks that are working in a diner, then I'm going to wear something that feels like that. So maybe I'll wear a button down, but maybe I'll wear jeans, and maybe I'll wear like a nice boot, like a low boot that's comfortable, I feel grounded in, and that is not going to get in the way of my storytelling. It's in the world, but it's not in costume. So that would be the way that I would do that. Same thing with like, Disney auditions, right? The number of Disney auditions I went to and everybody just dressed exactly like the caricature. It just gets in the way and it's unnecessary. But again, it's a matter of taste. There are some directors that like it. So you're going to want to like get to know who you're auditioning for, but really trust yourself in that. It's not a necessary thing to be booked though. And sometimes it most often just gets in the way. Don't overblock your song or your piece unless the role is specifically noted as a mime and you're asked to mime. Don't mime. My biggest pet peeve is this. Oh boy. Like don't mime things in an audition unless it's specific or it like really is like needed for the text. When in doubt, like all it does is distract me, and all I'm thinking is that you're miming things and like it's just too much. Just tell me the story. I'm here to meet you. I'm here to meet what you have to say as a director. I'm here to hear the story that you're telling me. I don't need you to overblock it, or, I need this chair and then I'm going to use this chair and I'm going to take my shoes off, and then like own the space, but like you've only got 3 minutes. If it takes you 2 minutes to set up your blocking, then you've really just wasted everybody's time, including your own. And don't require the casting or creative team to be your scene partner. This is a big one. So if you're walking in audition space, the rule of thumb is you look over the heads of the table, right? Unless you're asked to have eye contact, which there are very few roles that have you do that. Normally, it's only if you're auditioning for a role that breaks the fourth wall. So they want to see you engage. But normally the rule is, the standard is that you look right above the head of the casting team. That's kind of where your eye line should be. If you need to like have a focus being in the corner of the room or one specific spot, that works too. But having eye contact with the creative team makes it so I now have to be your scene partner, and I can't effectively take notes. I feel like I can't look down and look at your resume. I can't do my job. If I'm doing your job with you, I can't do mine. So that also means that when you're rehearsing your piece at home, rehearse against a wall, look at a wall so that you know how to find a spot and focus. And that's your scene partner. That's a really specific skill set to work on in your audition prep. All righty. Here's my do's. Okay, so have a well-rounded book repertoire that contains songs and pieces that show you. We talked about this already, but that's why it's on the do list. So make sure that that's what you're walking in with. Read the breakdown, all of it, every detail. No, really read the breakdown. The breakdown, we literally tell you what we want. Just read the breakdown. As a casting director, the number of times folks come in and I know immediately if they didn't read what the breakdown was. So if you get an audition appointment, this goes for all kinds of auditions too. If you are wanting to dip your toes into commercial and film even, it's going to be in the breakdown. If I need you to do the thing, I will tell you to do the thing. And this goes the other direction for the folks in this room that might be running theaters or on a creative team. The breakdown is your opportunity to give an actor all the tools that they need to give you the best performance. So if you want something specific as a director, it's your job to put it in that breakdown so that they know what to bring in. Dress comfortably, so that we kind of talked about this. You should be dressed in something that makes you feel confident and that is informed in the world of the show. So I know that seems like kind of a nebulous answer, but that's kind of the way that works, right? Just make sure that it's informed and that you're super comfortable. Don't wear shoes that are uncomfortable. Don't wear something that's going to restrict your breathing. And if you want to use like additional pieces of clothing for some movement, that's another thing too. You can use those on your person. So just make sure it's informed in the show and in the world and like help support your storytelling. But really comfortability is the most important. If you're most comfortable in a black t-shirt and jeans, come in a black t-shirt and jeans. That's fine. I just want to see what you're going to do. You don't need to costume the show. It's not your job. Have honest moments and movements within your song or piece that makes sense. So this is kind of in contrast to the like don't overblock. You can have honest movements and movements that are in there, and it can also really help for nerves, right? Like if I'm doing a 16 bar cut and there's one part that I'm always nervous about because it's in a weird part of my voice, I might make sure that there's something physically that I do that can get me out of my head for that moment. Especially with singers, a lot of issues with hitting notes are mental. That's a big part of vocal coaching, is working on the mental, the way that our mind and our voices work together. So work with a vocal coach, work with someone that can help you find the honest moments and those movements in your body that you can like loosely block for you as a way to help sink you into the piece. And then the last one, which I talked about a minute ago, is keeping your gaze above the creative heads team. If they have a reader, however, a lot of times they will have a reader in the room. That reader is typically there for you. So if you are doing a scene in a callback, for instance, just make sure you introduce yourself to the reader, just like you would the pianist, right? That person is your scene partner. So make sure that they know you, make sure that you get that little moment of connection. And if you're gonna give eye contact and be like, hey, I'm Ellie, it's so nice to meet you. Thanks for reading with me today. Do you mind if I have eye contact with you when I run this scene? Doesn't need to be long, just a quick little recognition of the fact that they are a human. You are a human. You're going to do a human thing and then move forward. It honors the space. Again, it's also going to inform casting and creative how you're going to work in the space. That tells me how you're going to work with other cast members. You're going to recognize everyone in the room and in the space and make sure that they're honored while you are also holding your own in that world. And this is my final, my final takeaway, because this is the question I also get, like, okay, so I did all the prep work. I know what I'm supposed to do. I've got all my hard materials. I went in, I did the audition, I did all the things. Now what? Like you just have to leave it where it was, learn from the experience, and then look forward. I have missed so many beautiful moments in my life worrying about an audition that I did a day ago or a week ago or 10 minutes ago. There's nothing you can do. Once you've done it, you have to leave it in the room. Make sure you learn from it. So if you do mess it up, learn from that moment. Be like, okay, I always mess up that phrase in that song. Is it the song? Do I need to change the song? What can I do to remove that obstacle and make it so that every time I do this particular piece, I'm not constantly frustrated? How can I make sure that I'm doing the Shakespearean monologue justice? Maybe I need to set up a coaching to get my cadence proper, or maybe I'm not understanding the root of this particular phrase that I keep getting a note on and I can't apply. Whatever it is, like, learn from it, because the audition process is such an educational process. It can be really great and it should be really nourishing for everybody involved. This shouldn't be scary. Because at the end of the day, if I can give one piece of advice to anyone that's auditioning, is that everyone in the room wants you to be the role. You're walking into a space where the creative team, the director, the choreographer, the music director, they want you to be the one, always. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. So I think often actors walk in and we think, oh man, they're going to hate me. They're going to hate this. And that's just inherently the opposite of why we're doing this. So it's really just a matter of, like, they want you to be the right one so badly. And then it's just a matter of, like, do you fit the story? Do you fit the story and the show and the world of that particular production? So much about casting is fit. It's not so much about whether or not you're talented enough or skilled enough. Yes, those are all factors, but it's really the right fit for the show overall. And I've had to not cast folks that were really great, but my goodness, do I remember them? That's another big thing to take away, is that just because you're auditioning for one thing, you might be auditioning for a show that you don't even know is happening, and you'll get called in a week or in a month or in a year because they remembered you from that audition. So your audition is not always just for the one thing you're auditioning for either. So even if you don't book the job, it doesn't mean that it was a bad audition. Every audition is a good audition. It's just a matter of what you take from it. So
I'll have two questions.
Great.
I'll do the first one first. So how and where do you find proper monologues? It's hard to find good published pieces on the internet.
Yes. So this answer is the answer that I was always given, and then it's still the answer that I give to folks. You find good monologues by reading plays. I mean, there are published monologue books. They exist. They're fine. A really good monologue is going to be from a fully fleshed story, though, right? If we're really talking about narratives and authentic storytelling, again, this is a matter of taste. Other folks might have very differing opinions, but this is my opinion. Is you learn good monologues by just doing that homework and reading plays by playwrights that you like, stories that make sense to you. Plays don't take a long, they're pretty fast reads, right? They're not super long. And it also helps you memorize a little bit faster too. It puts you in the world of reading text. There's a lot of really good benefits to reading plays, but one of them is that's how you learn monologues, and that's how you find monologues. So if you're just getting into plays and you're like, well, how do I even start finding plays? Like, what do I do there? I mean, Barnes and Noble has plays. There are tons of online like sources where you can buy a full play, but start by looking at plays that you like, and then take that playwright and find out what other shows that playwright has written. That's another way to approach it. I know that I have done that. I'm personally a huge fan of, I did Venus and Fur, right? It's a two-hander. That particular show is written by David Ives. So I'm a fan of David Ives' work. Therefore, I read a lot of plays that David Ives has written because I like the way that he writes text personally. Same thing with, if I wanted to look at a couple other pieces that were specifically written by women, I will start looking up and researching what are some, full full-fleshed plays that were written by women or have that kind of a story narrative, and then that's going to help inform me to find the plays that have those, and they almost always have monologues within them. Few plays don't have a monologue of some kind. So it's not the best, it's not a quick answer. A lot of folks want just here's a link to a website of all the monologues, but there's a lot of work that goes into picking the right material, and that's part of it, is just to read the plays. Just like that's how you would learn music, right? You would listen to a Spotify station or a Pandora station of contemporary musical theater, or a Broadway cast recording. That's how you learn music. It's the same when it comes to monologues. You just have to read some plays and get to know the work as a whole.
Thank you. The second question is,
Yeah.
What is the difference between equity and non-equity?
Sure, it's union status. So just like there are different unions in the world, we have the IATSE union. That's going to be for stagehand technical IATSE. The Actors Equity Union, that is the name of the union, is a particular union membership. So Broadway, for instance, Broadway houses are union houses. So in order to do a show on Broadway, you have to be in the Actors Equity Union. That's how those houses run. Non-equity just means that you are not in the union yet, or you might not ever want to be in the union. It's a personal choice. To get into the union, there is a couple different avenues. You typically have to do a certain number of work weeks. So you would have to audition for, we talked a little bit at the beginning of this about the structure of how there's community theaters, there's regional theaters, which typically have a union affiliation. There's off-Broadway, there's Broadway houses. There's kind of different structures of the theater industry. So typically that regional theater world, so theaters like, for instance, in Michigan, Mason Street Warehouse, that's a union regional theater. They have auditions for their shows, and they cast folks that are in the equity union and non-union. They kind of do both. So a lot of regional houses can do both. And then what happens is that, let's say you are non-equity, so you have not joined the union, but you get a role in a show with an equity house. They typically offer what's called EMC, which means Equity Membership Candidate. It's the EMC program. So that's how you would start. You would have to be in an equity house that offers the EMC program. You normally have to buy in. I think it's don't quote me, I think it's like $100 the first time. And typically if you're at a regional theater, you're getting paid. So they'll deduct it from your check to pay the union. And then you have to build weeks. You have to get so many work weeks. So I think right now it's, please don't quote me, it's been a while. I want to say it's 26 weeks. It might be a little bit more than that. I know it's in the 20 to 30 range. It used to be 40 weeks. And I know they dropped it down to 20 to 30 weeks. You can go to their website. They will tell you all of this, but you have to get work weeks. And then eventually you decide, if you have all your work weeks, you decide if you want to join the union. There are pros and cons, of course. But if you are in the Actors Equity Union, that does mean that you are only able to work in equity houses, right? So as a performer, because I'm an Actors Equity member, I wouldn't be able to perform in a community theater play or musical unless I got permission from the union. You kind of have to just go through the union route to make sure that that's acceptable. And there's a lot of different ways around it. Some community theaters also have the budget to pay just a contract for an equity actor to come in. I've done shows that way too, but it kind of depends on the house. It kind of depends on the politics and the budget and the necessity of it. So yeah, so the difference is you're either in the union, that's an Actors Equity Union member, or you're non-equity, which means you're just not in the union. And both are valid. Both have very valid workforces. I know plenty of folks that could have been in the union and chose not to because they got more work outside of it. It's totally just a matter of what fits for you as an artist and what kind of work is available. If you're in an area where there's not a lot of regional houses, so you wouldn't be able to work them as much, then maybe that's not the right option. If you're in New York, it might be worth looking at because most of the auditions in New York are for equity houses. So yeah.
I have a question. Some directors require cold readings. How would you prepare for a cold reading, particularly when you might have 30 seconds to a minute before they tell you to start?
Yes. So this is such an interesting question. So I personally, I have dyslexia. So cold reading, I instantly like get sweaty palms because I'm like, oh, okay, I can do this. So I mean, there's the quick answer is practice. The more you read plays, the easier it is to click in, right? So the more you read plays so that you can get really familiar with the structure of a scene, so that you're not reading stage direction accidentally, so that you know how to skim through to the right track, to the right role. That's a skill and it's a muscle that you can really build in, is how to like skim a scene and be able to get the meat of it really fast. I'm also personally a fairly slow reader because of that. So for me, reading plays all the time as my like extracurricular activity was a way that helped train my eye and my way that I process things to adapt faster in those moments where they hand you a scene. I will say most directors should give you a minute outside of the room with a cold read. That is that is the best way to make sure you're authentically setting an actor up for success. So as a director, I would never hand somebody a piece of paper and tell them to read it on the spot, because it's just, I know I'm setting them up to possibly have a bad experience, which doesn't serve me. So as a director, it's standard to say, would you mind taking a look at something else? Give the actor the option. Autonomy is important in that relationship. And say, if you wouldn't mind taking, like, stepping out of the room, I'll give this to you and we'll check back in with you in about 5 minutes. Is that enough time for you? And then let the actor inform you. And if they're like, listen, I need a little bit more time from this, I don't think I'm going to be prepared enough for this. Do you mind if I come back tomorrow? Do you have auditions tomorrow? Have that conversation, because cold reads, same thing with music too. You just have to recognize that if you're the director asking that of an actor, that might just not be a specific set of skills that they have. And it's also not necessary for the show, right? So you're also asking folks to do something that you're not even really going to use once you get to the show, if that makes sense. So I have strong feelings about cold reads. But it's not impossible. It's also like some folks like really blossom on a cold read. I have tons of friends that are like, oh, I love a cold read. I don't overthink. It's my best way of acting. For me, I need a minute personally. That's my own personal opinion. That is it, and also ask for it. I've asked for that too. They've said, oh, can you read this? I'm like, yeah. Do you mind if I step outside of the room so I can really get this down for you? And then typically they'd be like, oh yeah, that's fine. We'll like 3 minutes. Yep, 3 minutes is all I need. I'll walk out of the room. I'll do what I need to do. Sometimes I'll ask them if I can keep it. If I'm like, oh, can I make a note on this really quick? I'll circle some words that are rooted, kind of skim through it that way. Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to approach a cold read. It does kind of depend on the room though, and the creative team. Yeah, I'm going to stop my share because at this point I'm just open for questions depending on what folks want to discuss, although we answered quite a few as we went. So yeah.
Do we have any more questions? I mean, it's towards the end. Perhaps one last question for you. Do you have a anecdote of a particular audition that you enjoyed, or perhaps that was frightening, or?
Oh, wow, you got me put on the spot there, Rodell. Goodness gracious. So I am one of those folks that I personally love auditioning, which a lot of folks don't. It is one of my favorite things to do. I love an audition. I love a good callback. I love getting in the room and just playing. I do have a really good audition anecdote. Now, this particular audition, I wasn't the actor in this. I was working behind the table. I was helping with casting and I was the monitor for this particular audition. But it is one of those audition experiences that I hold and I think about constantly. And we were auditioning for a production of Should Have Been You. So for context, that particular show is about, it's like a wedding. There are two families involved, and the two mother tracks, there's the mother of the bride and the mother of the groom, are typically played by women like in their like 50s to 70s. That's kind of the age range. So for instance, on Broadway, one of the roles was played by Tyne Daly, to give you some world of what we're working with. So we were auditioning for these tracks, and this is an audition that happened in New York. So we had a ton of like very skilled, very professional actors. There were folks coming in from all over the place to audition for this particular show. And we had this woman come in, and the director was not familiar with her work, and I wasn't familiar with her work either. She was kind of a referral too. So we didn't really know. Most of the time with auditions that are in that style, they're appointment based, and like they've gone through maybe a submission or something. So you kind of know what's coming in. But this particular actress we were not familiar with. And she walks into the room, and she's coming in for one of the tracks of the mothers. And she was the only person that came in, and I'm going to describe what she was wearing because it's kind of important to paint the scene. So she came in and she was wearing this like very sophisticated pencil skirt, probably like a 3 to 4 inch stiletto heel, button down, kind of a like put together mother of the bride, like very very done up is the way to describe it. She comes in, she puts the music down, she gets ready, and we go to do this song. It's a very short cut, and this particular role is kind of a cliche of like a needy Jewish mother of the bride. That's it's part of her character, is to like really love the fact that she's like, oh, I'm a Jewish mother. That is who I am. It's part of her shtick. So she sings this song, and then at the end of this like little 16-bar cut where she's talking about her kid and all of this stuff, and it's very shticky. It's very farcical. The show is a musical farce. She drops to the splits. The entire room, I mean, out of nowhere, it's completely not necessary for the track. Like, it makes no sense in the context of what she was singing, but it was one of those moments. And she was she was also very rooted in her story. Like, her song and her piece was on top of it. And we all like looked over the table, because she also was she was petite. So she just like went away. We had no idea like what happened. We weren't expecting that. And we look over the table, and she's just there in the splits. And she's like, I know this has nothing to do with the show. I just like to do it every now and then, just in case you want it. And we all just kind of sat there. And then she like got up, and she's like, so did you want to hear anything else? What else do we need to do? She ended up booking the job because she did an incredible job in the audition. But it was one of those moments that I will never forget, of like, do I suggest that people drop into the splits or do tricks? Absolutely not. But also, I think when I reach that point in my career and I feel like doing the splits, if that's not owning your space and owning who you are as an artist, I don't know what is. So that's probably my favorite one that pops to mind when asked for that question.
Wonderful. Well, we're going to wrap things up, but we do have one last question that just came up, and this would be the last question of the evening. So what is your take on choosing songs and monologues that are age appropriate? And for example, should someone in their 30s be auditioning for Sunset Boulevard or Gypsy?
Oh, sure. So, of course, the context of the show is going to be important. Age appropriate pieces are super important, because it's not, that goes back to knowing your work and knowing if the story that you're going to be able, if the way that you could bring a story to the table is authentic to the role and to the story within the show. So I'm a firm believer in, also it's also important to recognize age range, right? We're in an industry where folks play a variety of ranges, but really knowing the range of what you can offer is important, especially when you're working with folks who are younger and going for older tracks. Experience is not really something you can act. So, and I say this as someone who played a lot of tracks that are mother tracks. And I don't have children, but I was well before the age of even considering children at the time that I played those tracks. And looking back now, I would play those roles completely different than I did when I was 20, 21, 22. Does it mean it was a bad casting choice? It's relative, right? If I was the best option available, we do what we can with what we have. But if you're, as an actor, looking to go out and audition for a track, you're just going to do a disservice to yourself and possibly the show if you're reaching for things that you don't really have any lived experience to bring to the table. When it comes to things like that big of an age difference. So if you're in your 20s, yeah, going in for Sunset Boulevard, you're going to be seen as the younger track, whether you want to be seen as that or not. That's just a reality. And again, this is my opinion. So someone else, another director or creative producer might have a very different way to look at that. But if we're really staying true to ourselves and trying to be authentic storytellers, then your lived experience should be influencing that approach.
Wonderful. Well, on behalf again of CTAM, thank you so much, Ellie, for sharing your experience and your insights on auditioning and for a wonderful presentation.
Excellent.
Wonderful to have you here. And for the rest of you, don't forget, we still have 3 more classes this week. Tomorrow we have our class on directing. So if you are looking into directing, this might be a great opportunity for you to think about what do directors do to prep for an audition. So the things that they do way before they cast the show. Then on Thursday, we have a look on technical theater, as well as on Friday. On Thursday, we have using different technologies, current technologies to present technical theater. And then on Friday, we have our youth theater class on introducing technical theater to our youth theater. So we'll take a look behind the curtain on this one. So again, thank you all for coming to our session this evening. It was a wonderful night of questions and answer. And once again, Ellie, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Have a good evening, everyone.